Bristol, a city in the west of England. Quite an old town, over 1,000 years old. So naturally, it's picked up a few spirits and ghosts along the way. I was just passing through Bristol for 24 hours on the way to the west, and so I had a quick hunt around for what I could find. And this is what I found. And welcome back to the Brac Shop. This is the portal to the paranormal, the spiritual, the unexplained. And I'm Tom from the shop. So welcome back to another episode, and this time I'm talking about Bristol. I was passing through Bristol a few weeks ago and on the way to the west for a function, and I was in Bristol for about 24 hours. So I had a quick chance to have a look around. So naturally, I looked at some of the possible paranormal places. Now, Bristol is an old town. It's over 1,000 years old in the west of England. And it's situated on the River Avon. And it was a major seaport, even though it was quite inland. A lot of the ships would come up to Bristol. A lot of trade would be brought in, and a lot of expeditions for the New World, as in North America, would have actually set sailed from Bristol as well. And unfortunately, it was a hub for the slave trade. So there's a lot of history, and for pirates as well. Though there's always been traces of people living in Bristol, even in the Iron Age. And there's a few findings of Roman forts from the Roman period 2,000 years ago. But it became a proper city around 1,000 years ago. And they say it's also where epidemics came into the country, like the Black Death and the pestilence, for example. So naturally, it would have attracted its share of ghosts and spirits through the years. We have All Saints Church and House, which is located on Corn Street, although I would say it's also almost on the corner of Corn Street and All Saints Lane. But it's a really old church that dates back to the 1200s. And it's part of St. Nicholas Market. It's right just next door to it, which is the market's started in the 1700s. So it's quite old, but the church dates back to the 1200s. Very old church, and they say it's haunted. Apparently there's an old monk that walks around, and also there is this hideous man with a very ugly face, a face that is so frightening that it could scare you to death. But mind you, people have evolved since then, so maybe in the past people weren't used to seeing disfigured faces, because we think he could have come from the period of the plague, when people's faces were disfigured, and society has evolved, and so we're more familiar with seeing disfigured faces, so we're not always so scared of them anymore. But that's the research I found. Apparently this apparition has a face which is so hideous that it could scare someone to death. And they say he could have been one of the victims of the plague. Now, these are the two ghosts that have been reported in All Saints Church. But the neighbours, and they could even hear footsteps on the staircase next door. And at one time, they even see a whole array of lights actually form on the wall. And there's actually stories of how this particular ghost or spirit would actually unbolt one of the maid's chambers and come in wearing an old cloak and whiskers on his face, and shake the bed and claw at her bed sheets. And that's some of the stories that I've been able to find on All Saints Church on Corn Street. There is another church, apparently All Saints in Clifton, which is also apparently haunted as well. I didn't actually make it that church, but just roughly looking at some of the research, they're a bit similar. So I think maybe some of the stories could have crisscrossed. So do let me know if I've got my places mixed up. And another place that I found was really fascinating as we go through the periods of time is the Christmas steps, which apparently was constructed in 1669. Now, these were these long, huge steps taking you from the bottom right up to the top. And on either side, there would be shops. And apparently, it was quite a dangerous area of town. Now, it was originally not always known as the Christmas Steps. Some people say it started as Knifesmith Street because of all the knifesmiths, the people that made knives in the area. But some actually say it was from the muggings that would actually take place along the steps. Now, if you actually go along the steps, it was quite crowded when I went there. But I suppose if you're at the wrong time, if it was getting dark, maybe in the winter months, and it was quite lonely, if you're walking down the steps, apparently muggers would stand in the doorways and then push someone down the steps. And if they were still alive, then they'd pull out the knives and kill them and rob them. So it was a very dangerous area. And over the years, knifesmiths, they say, could have evolved to become Christmas steps. And also maybe change it from sounding so dangerous and deadly. And with all the muggings, you would think there'd be more spirits and hauntings going on. Apparently, the only hauntings that I could find were actually from number 17, the shop there. And apparently that's where there used to be an old cemetery before it was all excavated and the Christmas steps set up. However, at number 17, there has been visions of a young Victorian girl. And at one stage, a Victorian lady, all dressed in black, happened to appear and just sat down at the kitchen table. But they're about the only reports that I've found for the Christmas steps. But it's quite an intriguing place, and it would have been quite a place through the years with a whole lot of different shops. And because of its style and its tradition, it's quite a tourist attraction today. And still around the 1600s, Bristol was quite a bustling hub, especially with the sailing ships coming with the trade, and it was a place full of hustle and bustle, and even the pirates would actually come into Bristol. And this is where we have the Llandoger Trow, and I hope I pronounced that properly. And this is one of the most haunted and famous pubs in Bristol. Dates back to 1664, and it's haunted by 15 ghosts. Probably the most famous is Pierre, which is a small little boy who has a brace on his leg, and he's supposed to be heard on the upper floors walking around. And sometimes is actually even seen looking out of the windows down onto the people below. And there's other ghosts that people have seen there and other visions, and especially hearing noises on the upper floors. But it's been a pub that's frequent by quite a lot of people. And pirates like Blackbeard, Edward Teach, the famous pirate known as Blackbeard. He used to drink from there. Also, Alex Selkirk, the castaway, who wanted to stay on a deserted island because he knew the ship he was on was going to sink, only because it wasn't seaworthy. They stopped at this island to get provisions, and Alexander Selkirk knew the ship wasn't seaworthy, so he didn't want to go back on. And that's where he stayed on this deserted island for 4 years and 4 months before he was discovered and taken back to society. And this is where he would drink later on at the Llandoger Trow. And he met Daniel Defoe, who was a writer, trader, philanthropist, and it's where Daniel Defoe wrote Robinson Crusoe. And it's also frequented by another writer, which was Robert Louis Stevenson, famous for stories like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And from meeting the other drinkers at the pub, he got his inspiration to write Treasure Island. And the pub in Treasure Island, the Admiral Benbow, is actually based on the Llandoger Trow. So, as I mentioned before in my other episode, it's been a while since I've read Treasure Island, but if you do read it, I would say the Admiral Benbow would probably be a good description of what the Llandoger Trow would have been. So quite a famous pub dating back to the 1600s. And fourth on my list of paranormal places, although it didn't seem quite paranormal at the time, and it's actually one of the landmarks to Bristol, is the Clifton Suspension Bridge, the magnificent engineering feat by Isabel Kingdom Brunel. It was originally thought of in the 1830s, but it wasn't actually built until 1864, 5 years after Brunel's death. When the idea was thought of, it was going to be the highest and longest suspension bridge in the world. Of course, by the time it was actually built, other bridges had surpassed that, but it was still a great big engineering feat by Brunel. And I had quite a fascinating look at the bridge when I was there. Now, on research, I've actually found that people say they've seen the vision or the spirit of Brunel walking around. A man in a tall hat and a frock coat walking around, admiring the bridge. Now, is this the spirit of Isabel Kingdom Brunel walking around looking at his creation, which the Clifton Suspension Bridge was, you could say, his darling, as it was one of his very first projects, and so basically like a dear child to him. What do you think? And then we have the Veiled Lady. What's her story? Some people think she looks creepy, eerie. I just think she's a face with a shroud over it, and she appears above a shop with 3 other men. Now, when the shop opened, it was actually a pharmacy back in 1868. And what is her story? They say the 4 heads represent the 4 seasons, and she represents autumn, and the man next to her winter. But what about the other 2? I'm not really quite sure if they're spring and summer, though. It seems like their main story has been lost. However, if you do delve back, and I've actually done a video on the Veiled Lady, it could have been actually just a popular style of architecture, because at the time they were putting heads on the side of buildings. And also it was a very popular concept to have statues with veils appearing over them. And maybe this was a style that seemed appropriate at the time to put on the front of this building. And so there was nothing deep and meaningful and nothing scary about it. But you could read anything into it. I do have another video on the Veiled Lady, so you can watch that, and I get more in depth to it. So they've 5 interesting places in Bristol that I actually had a look at when I was there in my 24-hour stopover, you could say. So if you're into the paranormal, do pop it along to Bristol. Lots of history, lots of stories, and probably good to actually spend a bit more time than just 24 hours. So what do you think? Have you been to Bristol? Have you got any stories from Bristol? Do write your comments below and let me know what you think. And if you do like this episode, do tell your friends and share the video. And click the like button. It'll help the algorithms and help grow the channel as well. And don't forget, subscribe if you haven't subscribed as yet, and press the bell and the notification sign so you'll always be updated when I release new videos. And I don't always do paranormal, I do spiritual and unexplained topics, which I believe they are actually all linked together by quantum physics. We just don't understand it yet. So, and if you've enjoyed this episode, why don't you buy me a drink? It'll help the channel, help me, and you'd be really appreciated. The links are below. And while you're looking at the links, have a look at some of our other links. We have a few different products down there, and we're also affiliated with the UK's online spiritual store, the Psychic Tree. Very reasonably priced, very reasonable worldwide shipping as well, and you get 10% off your first order. So do have a look through the links as well. So I do hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to seeing you again. And do comment below and say hi, and so I know what you think. So until next time, stay well and happy.